Moi everyone and welcome to Finish Your Plate. Year after year, Finns say that their single most popular Christmas dish is the ham. And indeed, it is usually the crown of all Christmas tables, and no Christmas table is complete without it. I have here a Finnish style Christmas ham that I baked myself. I have here some potato casserole. I have here some carrot casserole and some rutabaga casserole. These are all the classic items of the Finnish Christmas table. Of the Christmas casseroles, the rutabaga casserole is probably the easiest one to make. So rutabaga is this root vegetable you can find in well-stocked grocery stores. Sometimes it's also called wax turnip because there's this waxy layer that's applied on it. But turnips are not a one-to-one substitution with wax turnip, so make sure you get the right one. It is also sometimes called a Swede. You could certainly try peeling this, but with the wax layer, it's going to be very difficult. So what I tend to do is I will just use a knife and try to peel it just like this. I mean, you're going to lose some of the actual rutabaga in the process, but it's all right. There's plenty of it to go around anyway. So here we go. The rutabaga is peeled. Raw rutabaga has this smell to it. It kind of smells like cabbage, maybe a little bit like turnip. But when you boil it, it comes out really sweet. And I would say you could definitely consider this as an alternative to sweet potato in any dishes that you use sweet potatoes. Or you could even try this in pumpkin pie as a filling. I think that would be interesting. So now we'll just cut this rutabaga in pretty big pieces because we're going to boil it. And after boiling, we're going to puree it. So now we're just going to put our rutabaga in our pot over here, and we're going to cover this, just barely cover this with water, add a little bit of salt, and then we're going to cook these until they're tender. While my rutabaga is cooking over here, I'm just going to prep my carrots. I'm going to peel them, and I'm also going to cut these in big pieces. We're pretty much going to do the same thing with these carrots. We're going to cut them in pieces, then cook them until they are soft and ready to be pureed. That was pretty much all the prep steps needed for the carrots. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to barely cover these with water, add a little bit of salt, and then cook them until they are tender. Now that the rutabaga has been cooked, I'm just going to take some breadcrumbs. This is a small portion, so I'm maybe going to put maybe about a quarter cup of breadcrumbs in here, not a whole lot. About a quarter cup of cream and milk. And we're just going to mix that all up and let that sit for a few moments. Meanwhile, we're going to take our rutabaga, put it in our container to be pureed. Now, let this sit for a little while after boiling, so this way the rutabaga isn't quite as hot when you go and puree it. In our rutabaga puree, we're going to add spices. We're going to add about a quarter teaspoon of ground cloves. These are Christmassy spices. You could certainly experiment with whatever you like. What do you think is a Christmassy spice? Cinnamon and ginger. And we're going to add a couple tablespoons of brown sugar. Now we'll add our puree into our milk and breadcrumbs mixture. Now before we add the egg, we're just going to taste the seasoning. Specifically, let's check salt. No need for extra salt here. If you don't like the rutabaga taste quite as much, you could certainly substitute some of it with just potatoes. So if you say use maybe about a third of potatoes and 2/3 of rutabaga, that'll cut down the taste of the rutabaga a little bit. But the rutabaga really is one of those classic Finnish Christmas dishes. So now I'm going to add 1 egg into this mixture. Just make sure it's cooled down enough so your egg won't scramble when you add it to it. I'm going to mix this, and then I'm going to put it in an oven vessel. I'm going to mix the egg in, make sure it's all incorporated, and this is going to go into an oven-proof vessel. At this point, you could make this part early and then freeze this and then cook it maybe together with your Christmas ham. So this way, this part is ready for Christmas. I have here my oven-proof container, so I'm just going to butter it around. And I'm going to ladle my rutabaga in the container. Now I'm just going to sprinkle some breadcrumbs on top of this dish. And we'll add just a few pieces of butter on top. So this way, when you bake them, the butter is going to melt right into the dish. There we go. This is now ready for the oven. I'm just going to close the lid. Meanwhile, my carrots have been cooked. Just going to take them out, and we're also going to puree them. But we are not going to puree these with their boiling liquid. We're going to reserve this liquid that's on the bottom and make a rice pudding with it. And now we'll puree these carrots too. Now we'll make our rice pudding. I have here the leftover liquid from cooking the carrots. Let's see how much that is. And I'm going to add milk until I have half a liter. And I'm going to add my rice in here as well. Turn on the heat. So here we're just making a rice pudding with the leftover liquid from the carrots and some milk. And after the rice pudding is done, we're going to mix in the pureed carrots and spices. So now the rice pudding is ready. We're just going to add our carrot puree. Now we're going to add our Christmassy spices, some orange peel, a little bit of cinnamon, a little white pepper, ground cloves. You could also add ginger, allspice, things like that. Maybe anise. So we'll add a pinch. And now I'm going to take my baking vessel here and just add butter to it. rice and carrot mixture in here. A lot of times people will make this look really nice on top. You can draw patterns with the spoon or do things like that on it as well. We'll add a few pieces of butter on top. I'll just put the lid on this, and this is now ready for the oven. The potato casserole is the most time consuming of all the Christmas casseroles. So first I'm just going to take some potatoes and I'm going to peel them and I'm going to cut them in smaller pieces. Use starchy potatoes here, the same kind of potatoes you would use for mashed potatoes, because we are going to be making a potato mash out of these. Okay, our potatoes are now soft, so I'm going to use a potato ricer and rice them. Now this is the step where you could cheat a little. If you're going to go through the traditional method of sweetening this with enzymatic reaction, you got to keep the potatoes at 60 Celsius, that's about 140 Fahrenheit. If you are in a hurry, you just don't want to do that, you could just add a little brown sugar at this point and then continue just as if you had sweetened them through the enzymatic reaction. So I'm going to use the enzymatic reaction, which is the traditional way. So I got to wait first for these potatoes to cool down to 60 degrees Celsius. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle some flour on top of them. And flour actually has an enzyme, amylase enzyme, that is going to convert the starches into sugars in potatoes, and that's what's going to make this taste sweet. But in order for the enzyme to work, it needs to stay at constant warm temperature. Not too warm though, or the enzyme will burn. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle a heaping tablespoon of flour. Just mix it in. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more on the top. This is now going to go in a warm place overnight. After keeping it in a warm place overnight, it's going to turn considerably looser. It's going to change color a little bit, but most of all, it'll turn sweeter. Now our potatoes have been in a warm place overnight, and we can see that the color has turned, they actually turned a little bit gray, and this is normal. This is what you would be looking for. They still smell like potatoes, but if we taste them, the taste has turned considerably sweeter. If it's not sweet enough at this point, you could also add some brown sugar or molasses to them. Or like I said earlier, you could cheat and just skip this step altogether, and at this stage add brown sugar or molasses. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of melted butter. This is a pretty small batch, so it doesn't need much more than that. I'm going to add some milk. Again, a few tablespoons. We'll add salt. And we're going to mix this all together until we have a pretty loose consistency. And we're just going to add a little bit of white pepper. So now we're just going to put this in our oven-proof container. Now we'll just shake it to even it out. Make sure to leave a little space in the container because it might just boil over in the oven. Now we'll just add some breadcrumbs on top. And we're going to use a spoon just to make small indentations on the top. You could definitely go crazy here and do all kinds of decorations to make it look nice. we're gonna do is just add some pieces of butter on top. And now this is ready to go in the oven with the other casseroles. And of course, the Finnish Christmas ham has the mustard and breadcrumb topping. Sometimes you can see them made up really fancy, like some people like to use cloves on top of it as decorations. But a lot of times just plain mustard and breadcrumb is the way to go too. So now let's cut up a piece. This is basically just a salted ham. There is no curing agent used in the ham at all, which is why it's not red, unlike if you go to the store in the US and you buy a ham, most often it's colored red. Not really colored, but because there's curing salt in it, which makes the meat look red. Sometimes this is also called gray salted ham in Finnish specifically, and the reason is because of the color. And here we go, the classic Finnish Christmas main dishes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Finish Your Plate.